In the opulent corridors of Europe's grand palaces, where lineage and power were defined by royal bloodlines and ornate crowns, one royal family surged to remarkable heights, ultimately succumbing to their own obsession with genetic purity. The Habsburg Dynasty, a dominant force in European affairs for more than 6 centuries, would seal its fate through a practice as old as monarchy itself: inbreeding. What initially began as a meticulously calculated political maneuver to consolidate power would transform into a genetic catastrophe, leading to the decline of one of history's most formidable royal houses. The year was 1700, and within the regal palace of Madrid, whispers reverberated among courtiers regarding their king. Charles II of Spain, the last of the Spanish Habsburg line, occupied his throne as a grotesque parody of royal dignity. His jaw protruded so severely that he struggled to articulate words or consume food, and his tongue was disproportionately large, causing constant drooling. His physical frailty was matched only by a sluggish intellect, and despite 2 marriages, he had tragically failed to produce the one thing that was deemed vital for the monarchy: an heir. The Spanish court referred to him as El Hechizado, or the Bewitched, believing his myriad afflictions to be the result of witchcraft or divine retribution. Yet they could not fathom that the true curse lay far deeper, inscribed within the very fabric of his DNA. A dire consequence of generations of Habsburg unions among close relatives. Charles II was not ensnared by otherworldly forces, but rather by the harsh mathematical reality of genetic disaster. Modern genetic analysis would later unveil a shocking truth. Charles II's inbreeding coefficient stood at a staggering 0.254, a figure surpassing that of offspring born to siblings. He embodied the cumulative result of 2 centuries of dynastic marriages that prioritized political alliance over biological prudence. His very existence exemplified how the relentless pursuit of power could corrupt the fundamental tenets of human nature. The Habsburg narrative transcends mere stories of royal opulence or political misjudgment. It serves as a cautionary tale rooted in scientific reality, revealing the suffering wrought by the cruel laws of genetics that operate with ruthless accuracy undeterred by wealth influence or divine right. The tale illustrates how a family's quest for unity and exclusivity, originally conceived as a strength, was ultimately transformed into a debilitating weakness, precipitating physical deformities, cognitive disabilities, and leading inexorably to their dynastic extinction. As we delve into this dark chapter of European history, we meet not only kings and queens, but also the tragic byproducts of a system that cherished bloodline purity over the well-being of its members. The Habsburg tale compels us to confront unsettling truths regarding power, genetics, and the steep price of dynastic ambition. It serves as a stark reminder that no accumulation of gold, territory, or political might can circumvent the immutable laws of biology. The Habsburg Dynasty saga spans continents and centuries, encapsulating the Spanish Empire's golden era, the intricate complexities of the Holy Roman Empire, and the grandeur of Austria-Hungary. However, beneath the lavish ceremonies, the resplendent palaces, and the shimmering jewels lay a burgeoning genetic calamity that would ultimately prove more consequential than any military force, devastating plague, or political upheaval. This narrative recounts how a singular fixation on preserving power within their bloodline culminated in their total annihilation. Underscoring a critical truth, even the most formidable dynasties are not immune to the unyielding laws of nature, and the relentless ambition for genetic purity can lead to devastating outcomes. The origins of the Habsburg dynasty can be traced back to the Swiss canton of Argot in the 10th century, where they began as minor nobility with relatively modest landholdings. Their name is derived from their ancestral seat, Habsburg, which translates to Hawk's Castle, a fitting emblem for a lineage that would soar to unparalleled heights of political significance in Europe. Through strategic marital alliances and shrewd political maneuvering, this relatively obscure noble house would blossom into one of the most powerful royal families in European history. As the late medieval period unfolded, the Habsburgs embarked on a transformative journey from regional lords to continental rulers. Their methodical unions and military victories propelled them into positions of greater influence, primarily across the German-speaking territories of Central Europe. Their motto, Bella Geronta Ali, to Felix Austria Nubi, meaning let others wage war. You happy, Austria, Mary? Perfectly encapsulated their strategy. Expansion achieved through matrimonial alliances rather than military might. The ascent of Rudolf II in 1273 as the first Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor marked a pivotal moment, establishing a tradition that would see the dynasty maintain dominance over this illustrious title for centuries. The Holy Roman Empire, a convoluted political entity comprising much of Central Europe, provided the Habsburgs with both legitimacy and vast territorial holdings. This advantageous position allowed them to influence the selection of bishops, control vital trade routes, and forge alliances that extended far beyond their original Austrian heartlands. The dynasty's territorial expansion reached new heights in 1496, when Maximilian I orchestrated the marriage of his son Philip to Joanna of Castile, the daughter of the Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella. This single matrimonial alliance would become one of the most consequential in European history, ultimately bringing the sprawling Spanish Empire, complete with its territories in the New World, under Habsburg control. This marriage epitomized the Habsburg strategy of inheriting foreign lands rather than conquering them through warfare. By the 16th century, Charles V had inherited an empire on which the sun never set. From his illustrious Habsburg lineage, he acquired Austria and the Holy Roman Empire. From his Spanish grandmother Isabella, he obtained Castile, Aragon, and rapidly expanding American territories. And from his Burgundian heritage, he gained control over the wealthy Netherlands. The sheer magnitude of Habsburg power during this era was unparalleled in European history. They commanded the silver mines of Peru and Mexico, controlled the lucrative spice trade routes of the Spanish Netherlands, and oversaw the fertile agricultural lands of Hungary and Bohemia, not to mention the strategically critical Alpine passes between northern and southern Europe. Their realm encompassed dozens of languages, cultures, and religions, presenting both opportunities for prosperity and challenges that would test even the most astute rulers. Yet, even at the apex of their power, the seeds of their eventual demise were being sown. The expansive nature of Habsburg territories introduced a persistent challenge that would plague the dynasty for centuries: how to maintain control over such diverse and distantly located lands while preserving the integrity of the ruling family. The solution they adopted, intermarriage within Habsburg branches, initially appeared rational, but would prove tragically short-sighted. The strategic acumen that had characterized early Habsburg marriages gradually devolved into an insular approach. As the family's influence expanded, so too did their sense of exclusivity and belief in the superiority of their bloodline. What began as calculated political alliances morphed into an unhealthy obsession with preserving a pure Habsburg lineage, setting the stage for the genetic calamities that would ultimately lead to their downfall. In the brutal arena of European politics during the 15th and 16th centuries, marriage was never influenced by matters of the heart. It was driven by power, territory, and survival. Royal families understood that matrimonial alliances could serve to secure borders, avert warfare, and consolidate claims to disputed thrones. For the Habsburgs, this grim reality would evolve into a strategy so extreme that it would ultimately seal their fate. What started as pragmatic political maneuvering blossomed into a deep-seated obsession with bloodline purity that disregarded biological realities. While royal intermarriage was not exclusive to the Habsburgs, no other family pursued it with such unwavering fervor. Initial Habsburg unions were tactical masterpieces. Philip the Fair's marriage to Joanna of Castile unified Spain with the Habsburg lineage, while other unions forged alliances with Portugal, England, and France, expanding their influence across Europe and establishing their status as the continent's predominant dynasty. However, as the Habsburg territories increased and their power consolidated, their marital strategy shifted from forging external alliances to fostering internal consolidation. They grew increasingly anxious about preventing their vast holdings from fragmenting across generations through inheritance by non-Habsburg heirs. The apparent solution was straightforward. Intermarriage within the family would ensure that Habsburg regions remained under Habsburg governance and that the bloodline remained pure and untarnished by external influence. By the 16th century, this strategy had escalated into a rigid system of endogamy. Habsburg princes and princesses were systematically paired with cousins, uncles, nieces, and even more distant relatives sharing Habsburg lineage. Charles II married his first cousin, Isabella of Portugal, while his son Philip II wed both his first cousin, Maria Manuela of Portugal, and later a niece, Anna of Austria, who was 2 decades his junior. The increasingly tangled web of Habsburg marriages would grow progressively disturbing across generations. Philip II's son, Philip III, married his second cousin, Margaret of Austria. Their son Philip IV first married his first cousin, Elizabeth of France, and after her death, wed his niece, Mariana of Austria, who was 30 years younger. The continuous narrowing of the genetic pool increasingly compounded hazardous variations. With ancestral genes combining dangerously across successive generations, the Habsburg family constructed elaborate genealogical charts to track these relationships, aiming to maintain Habsburg purity, while nominally evading the closest degrees of consanguinity forbidden by the Catholic Church. Nonetheless, these calculations prioritized adherence to canonical law over biological realities. The Church might allow marriages between first cousins or uncle and niece, but genetics follows different, far more rigorous laws. Although courtiers and advisors occasionally expressed concerns regarding the health implications of close marriages, particularly as physical deformities and mental disabilities became alarmingly prevalent among Habsburg descendants. These worries were systematically set aside by political motivations and a deeply rooted conviction that Habsburg blood was inherently superior to that of other nobility. They had deluded themselves into believing that their genetic material was so exceptional that it could only be enhanced through concentration instead of dilution. This commitment to endogamy rendered the Habsburg marriage market increasingly artificial and restricted. As viable Habsburg partners became rarer, disparities in age among spouses widened. The degrees of genetic relatedness became more pronounced. What had once been a flexible method for constructing alliances solidified into a rigid doctrine that ensnared successive generations into an ever-tightening genetic spiral, leading inexorably toward the tragic outcome epitomized in the ill-fated figure of Charles II of Spain. To grasp the Habsburg tragedy, one must first comprehend the unforgiving mathematics governing genetics. Every human carries 2 copies of each gene, one inherited from the mother and one from the father. In cases where parents are unrelated, their children benefit from genetic diversity, allowing harmful recessive genes from one parent to be masked by healthy dominant genes from the other. However, when closely related individuals reproduce, this invaluable genetic diversity vanishes, and the ramifications can be dire. The concept of the inbreeding coefficient, developed by geneticist Sewell Wright, serves as a mathematical gauge of this genetic peril. This coefficient signifies the probability that an individual has inherited identical gene copies from a common ancestor via both parents. In a population without inbreeding, the coefficient is 0. For offspring of first cousins, it approximates 0.0625, and for siblings, it reaches 0.25. Charles II of Spain achieved a nightmarish inbreeding coefficient of 0.254, rendering him more inbred than if his parents had been siblings. This extraordinary level of inbreeding was not the result of a single incestuous union, but rather the cumulative effect of centuries of Habsburg endogamy. A mapping of his family tree resembles a distorted web, in which the same ancestors appear repeatedly. Philip II of Spain is recorded 14 times in Charles II's lineage, while Emperor Charles V appears 8 times. Instead of a typical array of diverse ancestors, Charles II's genealogy exhibited a pronounced reduction in genetic variety. The biological outcomes of such extreme inbreeding are both predictable and severe. Harmful recessive genes that would typically remain latent in a genetically diverse background become expressed. When an individual inherits duplicate copies from both parents, these detrimental effects compound across a multitude of gene systems, influencing everything from physical development to cognitive abilities, immune response, and reproductive capacity. Inbreeding depression, as geneticists term this phenomenon, manifests in a myriad of ways, including the prevalence of physical deformities, as exemplified by the characteristic Habsburg jaw, a severely protruding lower mandible that complicates eating and speaking. Developmental delays and cognitive impairments intensify. The immune system falters, making affected individuals more vulnerable to infections and diseases. Most critically for lineage survival, fertility rates plummet, exacerbated by high rates of infant mortality and miscarriages, alongside a troubling incidence of complete sterility. Research conducted by Spanish geneticist Gonzalo Alvarez and colleagues has illuminated the Habsburg family tree as one of the most extreme instances of inbreeding recorded in human history. By examining genealogical records of 3,000 Habsburg descendants across 16 generations, they calculated inbreeding coefficients that underscore the systematic genetic deterioration of the family line. This study clearly highlights a correlation between levels of inbreeding and the prevalence of physical and mental disabilities among Habsburg offspring. The Habsburg case also exemplifies how the ramifications of inbreeding accumulate over generations. Initial marriages between more distantly related relatives were associated with relatively mild effects. But as the practice continued and genetic diversity declined, each subsequent generation faced increasingly dire consequences. The relentless mathematical progressions of genetic principles illustrate the profound risks inherent in the pursuit of bloodline purity, ultimately leading to the tragic fate of one of history's most illustrious families. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to support our work and never miss an upload. Like this video, drop a comment, and share it with others to show your support and help us grow this historical community.